Evening, everyone. So, on the eve of the Conservative Party conference, Rishi Sunak apparently has headed over to Manchester. I thought we'd have a little look at all the party fracture lines that have appeared, because it's quite extraordinary. It really is, and it's quite convoluted. The various groups attacking Rishi Sunak. So I'm going to try and go through some of the various factions. Now, bear in mind, the Tory party doesn't pigeonhole into neat factions. There are some MPs who might be part of one group, but also part of another, and there might be some crossover here. The Venn diagram will be very complicated, so I very quickly moved away from doing that. But let's have, just in terms of the last 24 hours, where attacks have been coming from. All on Sunak. And the point will be, of course, with this, the reason for all of this is because Sunak has fundamentally not dealt with the key issue. In fact, if I get rid of this, what can I put on? Let's stick that in the way. This is ultimately why all of these attacks are now being made against Sunak from lots of different corners of the Conservative Party. And it is because he's gone nowhere with the polling. You know, there's even talk about from people I consider vaguely sensible saying, would they have been better off leaving Boris Johnson in charge? To which my response is, well, how do you think that would have worked if he was suspended from Parliament by the Privileges Committee? But let's get rid of that. Let's have a look at some of these groups. So the first one, and arguably the most dangerous one, the tax cut Tories. Now, Liz Truss is part of this group, but so are people like Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, Jake Berry certainly. You know, according to the Times, 33 of them. I'm going to be doing a video on this probably tomorrow. The thing is, I could do a video on all of these different groups, but I won't have time, so I'll have to pick and choose. I think I might do this one, because this is arguably the most dangerous. So there are 32 of these MPs who've signed what's called the tax pledge. Now, here's where there's a bit of a problem. I don't actually know what the tax pledge is, because they're all claiming different things. Like one of them said, I think Liz Truss said, she would not support a budget where new taxes were introduced. But then Jake Berry says he would not support a budget where the overall tax burden was increased. And then Priti Patel signed the tax pledge where she seemed to be calling for tax cuts. So I don't actually know what the tax pledge is. They all seem to be saying different things. But apparently 33 Conservative MPs so far, might be more now, but at the time I read that report, have signed this tax pledge. And what this is supposed to mean is when Jeremy Hunt announces the budget, well, presumably the budget statement, first of all, the autumn budget, if they do not, I mean, there doesn't need to really be a vote for that. But in theory, what it means is if by the time the actual budget comes around, if it doesn't meet their requirements, they'll vote against it. So that would be for, like, you know, you're really talking next March, because that's when the vote on the budget actually happens. But that's what they'd be suggesting if it, you know, but I don't know whether they want tax cuts or whether they just don't want tax rises. Either way, they're not going to be happy because there will be tax rises. There may not be new taxes. That's possible. But there will be tax rises. Tax rises are baked in. So that, in theory, means they'd vote against it. Now, if they vote against it, that might just, the numbers are actually very tight. It might just be enough to block the budget. Now, if you block the budget, then that's like a confidence vote in the government. The government can't govern. I know in America, it's quite common for the budget to be blocked, you know, with shenanigans, and they just, you know, it all sorts itself out eventually after a load of aggro. But in this country, it doesn't really work like that. So you can't just block the budget. Blocking the budget is basically bringing the government down. So, yes, they're arguably the most dangerous, but their threat is for next March, by which time we may have had the general election. Then the next group gunning for him would be like the Boris Johnson crew, like the levelling up, or really it's levelling down. So Boris Johnson's gone off on one in the Mail. I did wonder if he would, but then I wasn't sure because the Mail technically is anti-HS2, isn't it? Or is it? I can't remember. I'm pretty sure that they were. But anyway, Boris Johnson wrote his Mail piece attacking Rishi Sunak for not building the northern leg, as he calls it. What he's forgetting is there were supposed to be two northern legs, one to Manchester, one to Leeds. They abandoned the Leeds one while he was Prime Minister. But he is now saying it would be a betrayal to cancel the Manchester line. Now that he's not Prime Minister, he can say what he likes. So this is another crew. And in fact, if we lump together, because as I say, it's quite a movable feast, some of these groups. If we lump him together with the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which was set up to be the Boris Johnson fan club, people may have seen the Sun are reporting some leaked WhatsApp messages from that group, which is supposedly including some Tory MPs, although they've not published the WhatsApp messages because they say none of them are nationally important MPs, so basically backbenchers, where they are attacking Rishi Sunak quite vehemently. Read some of the things they've said, but they're really attacking him. They're going for it. Someone here has described Rishi Sunak as having about as much enthusiasm and appeal as a doorknob, which is an odd comment because doorknobs are useful. Someone here saying, I'm part of a separate online group of Tory Brexiteers. We used to avidly watch PMQs as we enjoyed the performance of it all. Now no one tunes in. That'll be a Boris Johnson fan. Even though they're now exactly the same as they were under Boris Johnson. I honestly think unless we remove Sunak, we are sunk. These are supposedly Tory MPs. So there's potential there. And remember, all you need is 53 Tory MPs at the end of next month, October, in like 4 weeks' time. You just need 53 MPs to have submitted a letter of no confidence in Sunak, and he will face a confidence vote. And so all it really needs is like 10 MPs from each of these groups, and that's it, you've done. Then you've got the Red Wall Tory MPs. Now, there's several groups here I could have said. The Red Wall Tory MPs, or you could say the North of England Tory MPs, or you could say the New Conservatives. There's a new group now, the New Conservatives. These are Conservative MPs that have been newly elected to Parliament since the referendum, so 2017, 2019. They see themselves as the real Brexit Tory MPs. Now, the North of England Tory MPs, which will be predominantly Red Wall Tory MPs, are calling for various things like new houses. They want the house building. They also want the infrastructure projects. They also want there to be a minister for the North of England. Like you have a Secretary of State, a cabinet minister. You have like a Secretary of State for Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. They want a Secretary of State for the North of England, for example. Which, at the same time, I would think, okay, yeah, you can go along with that. At the same time, have they not looked at how ineffective their Secretaries of State for Scotland and Wales are and thought, well, what actual benefit we're going to get? But then you've also got the New Conservatives. The New Conservatives, I don't really know who they represent, other than supposed to be 2017 and 2019 MPs. They're agitating as well, so they're getting in there. I just put Lee Anderson up there because he would be in the crossover of the Venn diagram of all three of those groups, but I don't know whether he is an active member of any of three of those groups. I'll catch up with some comments actually before I go into the next ones because it's all quite convoluted. Will Irish PM saying he will bring case against UK to Euro Court of Human Rights over legislation granting immunity to perpetrators of Northern Troubles further stoke Tory threats to pull UK out of the court? No, I mean it was a huge mess, that a huge mess. I mean I don't know enough about it to really talk too much, other than the fact it was obviously going to stoke tensions. Will it further stoke Tory threats to pull the UK out of the court? I suspect not, because I suspect most Tory MPs are just going to ignore it. But it is really not helpful for, UK Irish relations, is it? Incredibly unhelpful. Nicholas saying the tax pledge means the tax pledge. Yes, I'm quite sure. It is bizarre though. If you look at the various Twitter, all these MPs saying I've signed the tax pledge, and then they post a graphic with what it's supposed to be, and it's all different. They're all saying different things. Councils and public services are on the brink, so how can there be any tax cuts? Where's our money? Well, exactly. This is the question that people need to be asking. We've got the highest tax burden for generations. Even Tories, all of these Tory groups are saying the same thing, by the way. The tax cut Tories are going to be saying it very loudly at the conference. We've got the highest tax burden for generations. And yet you look around and you go, so where's our public services then? What are you spending all this money on? Now, highest tax rate doesn't mean highest tax revenues, by the way. It just means that an average person is paying more tax personally. Obviously, if we'd have had a more buoyant economy, if our economy had actually grown since 2010, I remind people it has not grown at all since 2010. It's been stagnant all that time. If the economy had have grown, we'd be able to generate higher tax revenues without such a high rate of tax. But yeah, where is the money? Where is the money being spent? They're raising all these taxes from people. What benefit are they getting from it? That is the question they need to be asking. Now, the tax cut Tories are asking this question and say, well, this is a reason to cut taxes then, isn't it? It's like, well, no, this is a reason to actually spend the taxes properly. But ordinary members of the public should be asking themselves what they're getting for their high tax burden. They're paying a higher rate of tax than they did under Labour. It's really that simple, a much higher rate, in fact. What are they getting for it? And yes, next year, we're going to see, I think, quite a few councils go to the wall. We've seen a few over the last few years. I think we're getting to a tipping point, which is another possible reason why Rishi Sunak may cut and run. The Tories may want that election sooner rather than later. Because next year there's going to be, it's not just more of the same of what we're having now. There's worse to come next year. Oh, under the One Nation Tories, I've got David Gauke. He was thrown out of the parliamentary parties, left the Tories to right and the lefty New Statesman. Yes, I know. The reason I put him there. So we'll go on to the next couple then. So the Isolationists, this should be fairly obvious. These are, Suella Braverman characterises these. These are the Brexiteers, the hardline Brexiteers, who want to cut off all international ties with anything to do with progressive politics. So, for example, those who are calling for us to leave the Council of Europe, basically, and to ignore, basically, they're not calling for us to leave the UN, but they might as well be, because she, for example, is saying, oh, we should not have anything to do with the Refugee Convention, for example. So basically, the end result of having people like this in charge, if she were to actually be in charge of our policies, would be to isolate Britain. But that is also a very dangerous and significant chunk of Tory MPs as well. And then the One Nation Tories. So the reason I put David Gauke there, because you're quite right, he's no longer an MP or anything like that. The reason I put him there is because I don't know who they are. There was a report, I think it might have been The Independent. I can't remember. I'll have to check. I've got it noted down somewhere. But there's a report that about 90 One Nation Tories or Liberal Tories, however you want to describe them, the sort of centre-right but with liberally social attitudes. Apparently there's 90 in the parliamentary party, which I find incredible to believe. And they're upset with Rishi Sunak as well, but for very different reasons to the others. They're upset that he's allowing Suella Braverman to say what she's saying. They're upset that he's reneged on net zero. They're looking at the situation and thinking that their party is being overtaken by extremists. Now, just to go back to this Sky News report on the WhatsApp messages from the CDO, which is like the Boris Johnson crew, in it, one of the comments was from an MP allegedly saying that they have to go to war against the Liberals in the party. In other words, they think the Liberals in the party have got too much sway. I mean, it's everything. It's just batshit crazy. But yeah, so the reason I put David Gauke there as this One Nation Tory is that I don't know who they are. Like, you know, this article I was reading suggests that there's quite a few of them and they're all very unhappy. And some of them are thinking they might have to split off and form their own party, but that's not going to go well. And some of them are just thinking, well, we need to stay in the party, which is correct, but, you know, then push back after the election. It's like, well, if there are 90, and I think that's a generous number. I'm not sure there's 90. Tobias Ellwood might be one. Yes, Tobias Ellwood would very likely be one. But I don't know for certain. Whereas David Gauke is definitely. So I put him there because he is held up as someone whom they associate with, shall we say. Someone whom they respect. So I put him there because he's clearly one. The others, I'm not sure. He said could be a jump to Lib Dems maybe. But again, what's the point? The other thing is, excuse me, I mean, some of them may be Eurosceptics as well. So some of them may not want to go to Lib Dems. But like jumping to Lib Dems doesn't really solve your problem. Because the Lib Dems can only win the seats that the Lib Dems win. Either way, whether you start your own party or join an existing one, you're not going to be an MP. You know, because you're not going to win the seats. Andrew Mitchell. There's any number that might be. It's just that there's none that I know. There was no one named in this. So I just put him there. They don't have to be sitting MPs. Boris Johnson's not a sitting MP. You know, I've still stuck him up there. Actually, with any luck, no. I'm afraid Liz Truss and Suella Braverman will be sitting MPs after the election. The ones in trouble, Lee Anderson is gone. And Rishi Sunak is in trouble. Suella Braverman and Liz Truss, yeah, they'll win their seats. Unless something quite remarkable happens. But yeah, it's... David Gauke, Rory Stewart, Dominic Grieve, etc. just released a book attacking the party's tilt to the right. I didn't know that. There's so many political books coming out at the moment. Absolutely insane. But yeah, so those are the sort of groups, and they're all upset with Sunak for one reason or another. And the thing, and this just highlights what Sunak needed to do when he became Prime Minister. He tried to walk this line of going for policies where he could get the majority of MPs behind him. But it was never going to work because ultimately they want different things. They want very different things. The only way he was going to keep them together was to close down that gap in the polls. You know, the only way he was going to keep them together, he had to close down that poll gap. And he didn't do so. And ultimately, that's where the problem is now for him. So he's going to go to this conference. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. All of these MPs who are agitating might just be more, you know, all bark and no bite, for all I know. They may realise that all this infighting is just going to make things worse. That they can't realistically replace Sunak because not enough MPs are that crazy. So all they can do, like if you make him face like a confidence vote, that just makes things worse for them all. It makes it worse for the whole Conservative Party. It would be a madness. But I think a lot of them are mad or desperate or both. Isn't it 15 years of austerity? I'm pretty sure New Labour started that. No, New Labour did not start that. I had a graphic earlier. I don't know where I've put it now. I won't be able to find it quickly enough. I did it in a video last week, though, which showed that actually, after the banking crash under Labour, public spending continued to go up as a share of GDP. So no, the austerity absolutely did not begin under Labour. There was talk that they were sort of hinting at it as we got to the election, but I think that was out of desperation. It never would have happened because it's crazy. It's mad. You know, if you look at what happened with austerity, so we ended up with taxes going up because David Cameron and George Osborne thought, oh, well, we'll just save money by cutting back on public services. And it's then, okay, so now you've screwed businesses over and created a load of unemployment. So you now have to pay out for the people who are now unemployed. And businesses aren't making as much money because you've taken away a load of their infrastructure. So they're not posting as much profit. So you're not generating as much tax from them. So the tax rate ended up having to go up. You know? So they came in thinking, we're going to cut taxes and cut public spending and it'll all be brilliant. And it was like, yeah, so now what's happening is the rate of tax is going up compared with Labour during that banking crash, and borrowing was skyrocketing under them as well, because they fundamentally failed to understand that if they don't believe in Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics is, put simply in a situation like this, says, when you're going through tough economic times, that's when you borrow to invest, because you have to maintain your public infrastructure. So you borrow during the tough times and then you pay it back during the better times. But with the Tories, we didn't get the better times because they didn't believe that. They did the opposite. They did the opposite of accepted wisdom. So, yes, it's... who knows what would have happened if they had it. But the thing is, though, it was... I did this a few years ago. If you looked at the way the UK economy was going with Germany, particularly in terms of borrowing, it was following a very similar trajectory. And what happened with Germany is a few years later, they'd cleared their debt because they did the same thing. They borrowed during those years of, while we were undergoing austerity, the banking crash years, they borrowed, but then their economy recovered. So their debt as a share of GDP went back down again, which meant come the pandemic, they were able to borrow again. And presumably in a few years' time, they'll, when they've come through it, it'll go back down again, assuming they have the same political ideas. I can't wait till someone makes a decent documentary of the 13 years of broken Britain. Do you know, at some point, I suppose someone will, but what will certainly happen, give it another 20 years, and what we're living through now, and I don't mean the last 13 years, I actually mean since 2016, really. This period of time is going to be a major subject of study for political historians. You're going to have whole lecture series on it. You're going to have books. There will be documentaries on this period of time. Once we've got through it, I don't know how long that's going to take. One Angry Pagan saying, I'll see where this is going. How likely is a large rebellion and who's likely to lead on it? I don't think it's likely to have a large rebellion because, as I say, it would be madness. Only right now, if you were a Tory MP, right now, the best thing you can do is try to privately persuade Rishi Sunak of doing things better. But to publicly cause a row is mad. Because here's what happens, right? So the process is this. If I were Keir Starmer, so let's say enough Tory MPs trigger a confidence vote at the end of next month, right? So I think it's from the 25th of October. So Graham Brady gives Rishi Sunak a phone call and says, Prime Minister, I've got 53 letters calling for a confidence vote. That's triggered the threshold. There's now going to be a confidence vote in the next few days. Then he will announce it publicly. And that vote will take place. Rishi Sunak will win it, just like leaders generally win it. But he won't win it by enough. So let's say he gets 250 MPs backing him, which would actually be, a decent number. Keir Starmer will then stand up in Parliament and say, this is why the Prime Minister is unable to get anything done. This is why he's cancelled housing targets. This is why he's U-turned on net zero. This is why he's stopping the HS2 project. This is why our schools are crumbling. This is why our hospitals are falling down. This is why our doctors are still on strike, because Rishi Sunak is unable to get anything through Parliament because he does not command the confidence of the House. He's only got 250 MPs backing him, which is not enough. Starmer will say that Sunak is leading a minority government. Where it's a charade, the idea that the Tories have got a majority. Sunak does not have a majority. And so, from the public's point of view, they will then see that Sunak is a weak leader, at which point, fatal. That's it then. Because Sunak can then say, a vote for the Tories is a vote for a minority chaotic government, whereas a vote for Labour will be for a majority stable government. And Labour looks stable as far as the public are concerned. Brad's saying that sixth form in 2012, I learned the UK economy would overtake Germany, but then Brexit happened and the rest is history. Yeah. Our economy's gone nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Oh, Pastor Rogue saying, 2 of the main pubs in Banbury Town Centre were closed at 10 p.m. Thursday night. No longer enough customers. Is a recession coming? I don't know. It's a bit like last year. All the economists and financiers were saying it felt we didn't get a recession in the end, but they said it was like, the thing is like when it comes to recession, like who really cares if you're having 0.1% growth or minus 0.1% contraction? It's the same, it's still bad. But so it's the same sort of thing. You've got signs of recession. It doesn't mean that there will be a technical recession. But like at the moment, the latest forecast is that over the course of this entire year, we're going to have 0.3% growth. It's like 0.3 that, and the Tories are delighted at that. And it's like, that's zero. That's zero growth, rounded off to the nearest percent. It's nothing. And it's what we've been having for years. Like I said, if you look up the GDP of the UK in 2010, it's exactly the same as it is now. Only the value of a pound is less now. So that means it's actually worth less. And that's the overall economy. Bear in mind the population has increased. So we actually need to spend more on public services, because you need to maintain a certain level of per capita spending, which means that, but we haven't got and this is the problem Labour will have as well, until they get the economy moving. You've got an economy that has stagnated for too many years. Oh, what's my thoughts on Labour backing down on plans to end the charitable status of private schools? So, I've got quite a few thoughts, which I will do in the video on Labour Social tomorrow. But if I just go through my 3 main thoughts, the first of which is I gather it's because of legal difficulties. And that's not just Labour saying it, because it's like, but a tax lawyer has basically suggested that it wouldn't have been easy anyway. I don't know why, but the other thing to say is like it's not backing down to pressure. By the way, this is not political pressure. Labour are not backing down. It makes no sense. Hardly anyone goes to private school. It's like 7% of people send their kids to private school, or rather 7% of people go to private school. This is not something Labour have had to back down on. It's purely from a point of view of implementing it. The other thing I would say is the idea of removing charitable status for private schools, which I'd still be in favour of. Like, I hope this isn't. I hope this is just their position for when they go into government, but that there is still a long-term plan to remove their charitable status, because they're not charities. They shouldn't be considered charities. There's a lot of organisations should not be considered charities. The IEA should not be considered a charity. It's ridiculous. But if you think about it, what was the justification for Labour ever saying that they were going to remove their charitable status? So that they would pay VAT on school fees. Well, they're still going to pay VAT on school fees. They're still going to make sure that happens. So, in a way, in terms of the main purpose for them losing their charitable status, it's like the same thing. That being said, it's not the same thing, because although they will be paying VAT on school fees, they won't necessarily be paying VAT on donations, because they'll get gift aid, won't they? So, and that's ironically an issue for the bigger schools like Eton, who elicit large donations from their from their alumni. So by simply applying VAT to fees and not removing their charitable status, ironically, you do what you're trying to do with the smaller private schools, which is to make them pay VAT. But for the larger, more established, the posher schools, the ones that are the real problems, they're going to be able to still not pay VAT, or not pay tax rather, on their donations. So I'm still not happy. But at the end of the day, if the reason is purely technical, then, there's no point whining about it, is there? When Angry Pagan, why am I hearing people say Starmer's anti-trans? I really couldn't tell you because I've not heard those myself. If I was to guess, and it's pure guesswork, we know that after the Uxbridge by-election, Labour had a bit of a mini meltdown, and they changed some of their attitudes towards some of the trans issues, particularly regarding the gender reform bill, for the self-ID for young people. I think they changed their position on that. So it may be that. I don't necessarily think, even though I don't dabble too much in trans issues, I don't know enough, but I would say, I said at the time I was disappointed that Labour changed that position because it didn't seem strategic. But at the same time, I also don't think it's fair to suggest that he's anti-trans. Labour in government will be boosting trans rights. So I don't think you can really say that they're anti-trans. But that is a guess on my part, because I've not heard people saying it recently, so I therefore don't know what it's in connection with. Craig saying there, going back to the economy, can't grow through improved productivity if you don't invest. And the Tories encourage dividends, not reinvestment. Yes. Any growth is from workers slaving harder. Well, that's exactly it. That's why. And this is why the Conservatives make no sense. I did a stream on this a while ago, didn't I? I might have even done a video. I can't remember. This is how they make no sense. Like, their model relies on more and more workers in the economy, especially when we've got people living longer. So their model absolutely requires lots and lots of workers, because if you've got lots and lots of workers, first of all, you're producing more, which is what's needed to be able to sustain the retired population. But you also make it easy for employers to screw them out of decent pay. So you need lots and lots of workers, and yet they're anti-immigration. And it's like these two things are contradictory. It's not just that they're not compatible. They're actively antagonistic, these two attitudes. They need to be one or the other. They either need to say we're anti-immigration and we're happy for the size of our economy to shrink down to the dynamics of our native population, shall we say, but they don't. They say that they're about growth. They're about economic growth. So, okay, so you're about economic growth. Therefore, you have to be in favour of a large migrant labour force, because the advantage of a migrant labour force is some other bugger has trained them up. Another country has educated them and trained them. You're getting the benefit of their working years. Some of them will stay in the country and retire, okay, but a lot of them will then leave. They'll work for a few years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever, and then they'll go back home to retire. So then you don't have to support them in their old age either. So if you want a growing economy, you have to be pro-immigration. They make nothing they do makes sense. Like every other political party, well, of the mainstream ones, I'm not including Reform UK in this, of the ones that have got Westminster representation, okay, let's be clear, the Lib Dems, Labour, the Green Party, the SNP, Plaid, all of them have policies which sort of make sense. It doesn't mean I agree with them, but there's a logic. They say, this is what we want to achieve. All of them have got core aims, and they say how they want to achieve it, and it's yeah, that makes sense. that will lead to your aims. The Conservatives don't make sense. They're just deluded. Anyway, if the economic growth is smaller than the inflation over a year of actual recession, no. To have a recession, you just have a contraction of your GDP in 2 consecutive quarters. That's it. Whether that's the right way to define a recession is another matter. That's a matter for economists, not for me. But that is what a recession is. You have to have a contract. Your economy can contract over the course of a year, and you haven't been in a recession. You know, because if you have growth, if you have like 0.1% growth one quarter, then minus 0.3% contraction, then plus 0.1% growth, minus 0.2% contraction, then overall you've got a minus 0.3% contraction over the year, roughly. Percentages muck about, but roughly. But you haven't had a recession because you didn't have 2 consecutive quarters where it contracted. A Telegraph reporting that Murdoch's considering backing Labour as he wants to back a winning horse. This is concerning. It's not concerning, and it's perfectly normal. Don't worry about it. Murdoch ultimately wants to be right. He backs the Conservatives. He will back the Conservatives in a tight contest. But if it's obvious Labour are going to win, he'll back Labour. It's really that simple. He wants to be seen to be like he's not an idiot. He knows that it does him no good to be flying in the face of the opinion of his readers. They're not technically his readers anymore because he's retired, but you know what I mean. So it's not concerning either. Remember, like when people go on their Murdoch backed Blair, and it's like, yeah, and Blair was far too close to him. I criticised him for that a lot. But at the same time, that was for that 1997 election. If you looked at the way that the likes of The Sun were reporting on Blair after that, then it was anti-Labour. I mean, do you not remember? Well, you may not remember. There was one Sun front page. This was when Labour were already in power. When its front page described Tony Blair as the most dangerous man in the country. So it's not concerning at all. It will only be concerning if he manages to get influence in the Labour government. There's no reason to suppose he will do that. I will remind people that Keir Starmer was the guy who shut down one of Murdoch's papers, jailed one of his top guys, and tried to jail another one. Didn't quite get the second one. But there we go. If private school fees are charity donations, they're not, though. Do the schools get gift aid and parents get tax rebates? No. But there is a fear that what could happen is that private schools who can get away with it, may lower their school fees on which VAT will be applicable and try to elicit donations. That's where, and I don't know how credible that is, because apart from anything else, there'd be no requirement of the parents to pay the donation. So, only certain schools, I suspect, would get away with it. But that is the worry. That is, at the end of the day, I'm not going to say about this policy that I think it's all fine. And, the purpose was to make them pay VAT on fees, and it's still going to do it, so it's all fine. It's not. I would still far rather the charitable status were removed. But at the same time, if Labour have basically discovered that it will take a pissing long time and a lot of parliamentary time to do this because there are some weird complications, then, and if it's much simpler, given the legislative programme they're going to need, if it's much simpler to say, right, we're just going to make them pay VAT on fees and worry about it later, okay, whatever. At the end of the day, Labour need to invest more in public services, so they need that VAT from private schools to fund state schools as well as other sources. As long as Labour can get the tax revenues they need to invest in the public services, then again, I'm less bothered about how exactly they do it. There are certain, there are caveats to that, of course. But ultimately, as long as they can do that, exactly how they do it is of less concern to me. How are Labour going to bring railways back into public ownership when the Tories are giving the likes of Avanti and Riva new 4 to 8 year contracts? Yeah, good question. But the only way they can, like they've said, they're just going to wait for the licenses to expire and then bring them in. That's all they can do. The thing is, so it's not going to happen on day one, basically. It's not going to happen on day one. The other thing that Labour could do, I'll tell you what Labour could do. They could do what they're doing with the water companies, and they could make sure that the railway companies are delivering a proper service, and maybe, you know what I mean, lean on them. So maybe some of those, because you know what's, I mean, the Conservatives, the actual Conservative government, not just this one, but since Cameron, have actually had to take some railway companies into public hands because they weren't able to run the service. Well, if Labour were to squeeze them a bit and demand that they deliver the service properly without whacking up prices all the time, well, maybe they can persuade some of those companies not to see out those 4 to 8 year contracts. So that's what I would say there. But at the end of the day, the only way to do it, you can't be shelling out stupid amounts of money. That's how you lose the next election. And then the Tories will just privatise it anyway. The way you have to do it on the cheap. So that's what they'll do. There's a comment about the trans issues follow-up. Hey, it's all saying, regarding trans issues, I'm hoping Starmer has been pragmatic, because what is a woman is a trick question used to attack trans people. Yes. From personal experience, it's divisive. It is incredibly divisive. Yes, I agree. I'm quite sure he is being pragmatic. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll also say, I mean, bear in mind, Keir Starmer chose to be a human rights lawyer. You know, he was clearly a brilliant lawyer. He's had an incredibly impressive career. It's very obvious he was a good lawyer, and he could have gone into corporate law and made stupid amounts of money if that was his interest. He went into human rights law. You know, so he hasn't suddenly been kicked in the head by a horse. It's the same with his Brexit attitudes. They are clearly strategic. But at the same time, I think it is also fair for people to say, unless he's been explicit about a particular policy, then to be cautious and just see what comes. Because the other thing is, I mean, and the other problem is with governments, like when a party comes to government for the first time, and remember, the top of the government, or most of the government, in fact, will be new to the job. Almost very few ministers in the next Labour government will have had ministerial experience from the last one. It'll have been like 13, 14, it's already 13 and a half years nearly. So very few ministers will have experience. And it's very easy in governments to put certain things on the back burner because they're complex problems. And the job will be to focus them. So it will, you know, there will need to be lobbying of ministers to make sure that they don't take their eyes off what are some of the thornier issues, because what you want to do is deal with the quick. Because you can imagine how it is. Labour come into government, they've got to deal with 13 and a half to 14 years of Tory mismanagement. And what do? You pick on the easy things to do first. You've got a massive in tray. What do? You pick on the easy things first, the quick and easy things. And the problem then is you can find yourself 7 or 8 years down the line and you haven't even touched something that's been in that in tray all that time. So that'll be the difficulty, I think. Making sure they've got the capacity not to ignore anything. Does Labour publish a strategy to grow the economy in the North and the Midlands? They have published papers on their industrial strategy. All I would say is that people who will pay attention to it have been fairly impressed. Certainly businesses have been impressed, and unions are happy with it as well, which is always a good sign. Phil saying that only after the phone hacking scandal, Starmer was a regular at Murdoch events and dining with top staff until then. It's irrelevant though, isn't it? Utterly irrelevant. Did he prosecute them? Yes. Did he have to? No. It's his choice. You know, you keep looking for reasons. You keep looking for reasons to attack him. There's no need for it. Like, at the end of the day, he shut a Murdoch paper down, put one of his hacks. At the time, admittedly, he was working for David Cameron, but, you know, Andy Coulson was one of Murdoch's top guys. put him in jail, and went after another one. They say all private schools rely on fundraising anyway. Yeah, so do state schools these days. So do state schools. I don't know that they get to call it a charitable donation either. I actually don't know what the rules on that, because I never had to deal with that directly. Derek's saying, this is to do with productivity has increased every decade, but pay stagnated since 2009. Pay has stagnated since the 1970s. In both the UK and America, pay has been stagnating since the. But in terms of like related to inflation, yes, since 2008, I suppose you could even say, pay has not gone above inflation in all that time, really. Or where it has, it's just poked its head above a little bit and then straight back down again. So there's been no. See, this is the problem with the strikes. Like at a time like this, it'd be like, well, strikes aren't helpful because we're in this tough economic times, and the problem is the last time we had the tough economic times and pay wasn't going up as much as you would like. So in other words, there was a bit of a drop in living standards. What should have happened a few years after that is the pay should have started going up again. So what happens is you get either a recession or something very like it. Like at the moment, it's not a recession, but it's very like it. So you get an economic tough time. So it's like, okay, so the pay is going to be suppressed a little bit. As long as corporations aren't posting record profits, then we can live with that. Unfortunately, they do. But then after a few years, the government are supposed to go, right, we've got through that now. We can now start boosting your pay. So then you should start to see your pay going above the level of inflation again, so that the next time there's an economic crash or whatever you want to call it, you've got ahead of the game again. And so if you're now being told for the next 2 or 3 years we're going to have to tighten our belts, you might not like it, but it's a bit like, well, because you've been through it, you know that when the last one ended, your pay went up. So then you will go, okay, well, we can do this for a few years on the understanding that our pay will then increase above the level of inflation so we can get back to parity. And people will put up with that. People will accept that. Whether they should is another matter, because like I said, if while this is happening, large businesses in particular are posting profits that are just as good as before. Like, this is what gets me. When you have like a time like this where the economy is struggling and yet large corporations are still posting record profits, it's obscene. Where was the thing? Hang on. Someone was showing this graph. You see this every now and then. Let me see if I can find these stats again. I was looking at earlier. Someone posted them again. Here we go. 1990, there were 15 billionaires in the UK. 2023, 177 billionaires in the UK. In the year 2000, across the world, 470 billionaires worth about $1 trillion collectively. 2023, 2,500 billionaires, more than 5 times as many, collectively worth over 12 trillion, over 12 times as much. You know, this is the thing. So I'm okay with the principle of when the economy is struggling, you tighten your belt, as long as everyone's doing it. But it's not how it works, is it? But what should still work is once you've got over it, you should still then at least be making sure people's pay gets up to parity over the next few years, ready for the next one. Over the period of a generation, you should not see people's pay going down in real terms. Should never happen. And yet that's what's happened. Matthew said, I believe Blair's cozy with Murdoch prevented him implementing PR and adopting the euro. I think that's a fair comment. And changed the course of history. Yes, I think that is a fair comment. He was absolutely too close to Murdoch. But the point was that Murdoch did not become a Labour supporter. He backs Labour in 1997 because the writing was on the wall. That's what's going to happen. But in the sort of mid-term periods, no. Because, again, what he wanted was a Conservative government. He wanted a Conservative government. Phil saying, you ask questions, I don't. I ask questions, Phil, you don't. I always ask questions, but I also answer them. I don't make stuff up. If Labour can't bring rail operators into public control, then surely they can regulate them better. This would force them to run the business properly or face heavy fines. Yes, that is 100% what will need to happen. Tougher regulation, which does two things. First of all, yes, it then means that the customer gets a better service and the staff gets better working conditions and pay. But also, it means that if it's going to make it more uncomfortable for them, for the owners, then they may say, well, we're not finding this contract all that lucrative, we'd like to give it up, to which point the Labour government can say, no problem, we're fine with that, we'll take it off your hands. Phil, you have to take inflation into account here too. Sorry, I might have missed that. With regards what? Because I'm not aware that I haven't taken inflation into account. Do you mean when I read out those things on the billionaires? Yes, I completely agree. But here's the thing. If all the billionaires in the world collectively owned $1 trillion in 2000 and it's over 12 trillion in 2023, inflation, in fact, I don't know what world, because obviously this is in dollars. Inflation has been different across the world. Let me see if I can find a global inflation calculator. That would be better. Right, yes, in fact I can. So let's have a look at 1 trillion in, when did we say? 2000. So inflation has been about, since then, 69%. So that $1 trillion, now admittedly that was for like a fifth of the billionaires, but even so, it would, that $1 trillion, I mean, let's make it 5 trillion. That would still be about 8 trillion. So all that 2,500 billionaires that now own about $12 trillion, with the 2000 figure, it should be, if it stayed the same, and bear in mind the 2000 figure was likely too large, but if it had stayed the same, it would work out about $8 trillion, but it's $12 trillion, it's 50% more. So those wealthiest people in the world have made gains, real term gains of 50%, while everyone else has gone down. So even when I take inflation into account, they've still made 50%, increased their wealth by 50%. When others, and that's fine if like people's pay's gone up by 50% in that time, not a problem, but it hasn't. What are the chances that Sunak will announce a snap election at the party conference? I suspect extremely low. I think there is a very good chance he will announce a snap election. Basically, every time I look at it, I think that the chances are increasing of a general election much sooner than we might imagine. I don't think he'll announce it at the conference, and I'll tell you why. I think he wants the Indian trade deal first. That's what I think. But there is an interesting game of chicken going on, potentially. I mean, I'm not in the Conservative Party. I don't have sources directly inside. I know people who know people, and that's about it. But what I would say is the interesting game of chicken is, I think Sunak wants that India trade deal in the bag, and he wants to get that next month. But I also think he needs to act before there's a serious rebellion against him. Now, I don't know whether he believes there is a serious rebellion against him. There's an awful lot who have the power to do it and are chuntering a lot. Does he believe that they will go through with it? I don't know. But I can see, I know people keep bandying about this idea of the 23rd of November, and I've heard people say that for some time. I would be disappointed because that is the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who. That's unnecessarily muscling in on a British institution. But at the same time, at least the day afterwards, Doctor Who is 60 years old and we've got a different government. But that is possible. But I'm not sure if he can do it for the 23rd of November and still get the India trade deal. Can I remember? I can't remember when he's going to India. I know he's just been to India. It might not be a physical visit. Oh, no, I think he is going. Right, so I think... Oh, this was a while ago, though. This isn't recent. I can't find anything recent. This was last month. But there was a suggestion that Rishi Sunak might go to India again in October, but I think it was the end of October. If Sunak announces the election this week, Labour will have their conference to rally the troops. It would be a very different thing for Labour. Like, the conferences are huge money spinners. So the benefit to Sunak of calling the general election on Wednesday, next Wednesday, is that it basically screws Labour. Because on the one hand, Labour will still want to go... Labour would still want to have their conference. It generates a lot of money. A lot of money. And I'm also hearing from multiple sources, the government have asked the Electoral Commission to massively increase the cap on spending, which sounds weird because Labour are making more money than the Conservatives at the moment. But if the Conservatives think they've got some way of generating a load of cash really quickly and they think they can screw over Labour's conference, who knows? Because the problem for Labour would be, on the one hand, they want to get these donations in. On the other hand, technically the campaign will have started and they need to be out campaigning. So it'll be tricky. It'll be very difficult. It'll be a really difficult conference. I don't know exactly how it'll be impacted. Brad's saying if it was 23rd November, the results come out on my birthday. Oh, hang on a minute. That's an interesting birthday. That's the anniversary of Freddie Mercury's death, isn't it? 24th of November, I think. But anyway. The pilot episode of Doctor Who was delayed by a day because of the assassination of JFK. Well, it was... No, I don't think that was true. I think what happened... I mean, I wasn't there. But I seem to remember, I thought what happened was they had to just show it again the following week. Because JFK was assassinated on the 22nd, wasn't he? And then Doctor Who was on the 23rd. Which it was always supposed to be because that was a Saturday, wasn't it? I got the impression, because the news was occupied with that they sort of showed it again or something. I don't remember. But I wasn't around in 1963, so I don't know. Would Sunak call an election to dodge a conference vote in his leadership in late October? Yes. Or if he's got an... Well, who knows, because he's an idiot. If I were him, yes. Like, a conference vote really screws everyone. Brad saying it was, but I was born after Mercury's death by a few years. Oh, you're young. National Audit Office records government expense, but how to tell if it was well spent? Interesting question to finish with, because at the moment they can't, or well, that's not quite true. There are independent groups who will look at it, but Labour are going to bring in an office specifically to scrutinise public spending and make sure it is being well spent. Technically, you can have things like, you can look at reports from the Institute for Fiscal Studies and things like that. Also, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility can look at things as well. But yeah, Labour's plans are to make sure that public spending gets a lot more scrutiny. But there we go. One angry pagan saying there, in terms of current and future migration, countries like ours, the US, EU, etc., need to focus more on building housing and infrastructure to accommodate those coming. How possible for Labour? So, well, first of all, I would also say we could do with stabilising the parts of the world the refugees come from. Because in actual fact, it would be better for everyone if we didn't have... Where you've got refugees, you've got basically a screwed up part of the country, of the world, sorry. Whether it be down to environmental problems, which, you know, we can now do limited things about, or whether it be political instability, which we can do a great deal about. But yes, in terms of housing, much easier for Labour than the Conservatives, because Labour have no problem saying there should be housing targets. You know, the Tories are, no, not liking that. Even the Lib Dems recently, although Ed Davey's not allowed to, his members didn't allow him to. But Ed Davey has tried to engage in a bit of NIMBYism on housing targets. Labour have got no problem with it. So there's no political fallout for them saying, no, we should build a shitload more houses. But what I will say is, there are interesting ways to do it. Right, there are interesting ways to do it. And my final point, one of them is, the problem is I only really alight on these sort of stories a lot. I don't read about them a lot. But someone was suggesting, there's a bit just above East Anglia, around Kent, just above Kent or something like that. And there's just off the coast, it's quite shallow. And this, like in the Netherlands, they've done this as well. It's that you could actually build an artificial area of land, bolt it onto Britain, and you could build a city the size of Manchester. Now, I do know that when the Conservatives over the last year have been agonising over the fact they know they need to build houses, but they've also got NIMBYism to worry about. And some Conservatives have suggested, I think Michael Gove might be one of them, have suggested, well, could we solve this problem by building entirely new towns and cities? You know, that way you're not treading on the toes of local homeowners. You know, you just build an entirely new town. So that would be a possibility. Oh, Mike Higgins saying the wash there. That sounds right. So that would be a possibility, wouldn't it? That, you know, you could use some sort of a bit of lateral thinking. It's not a new idea. As I say, it's been done. Just not in this country, to create an entirely new population, like, you know, a new community, a new town or city or whatever. That would be one way of doing it. Rising sea levels, well, I mean, we're an island, you know, what do you want? But if we need to build a load of houses really quickly and we need to do it without a lot of aggro locally, isn't that a way to do it? You know, to build new towns. That's what I would say. But we'll leave it there. Oh, in fact, last one, go to, because I like this comment. We need post-war levels of development in this country. We do. Unfortunately, we won't be able to justify post-war levels of investment. So we will have to see. But thank you very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening. We shall enjoy the Tory Party conference. Actually, when we're doing this next Saturday, I'll just be getting ready to go to the Labour Party conference. We'll see what's happened in a week's time. But have a good evening, everyone. Until next time, I'll see you later.